Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the final installment of Summer with the Saints. This is Thursday's Theology. I'm Jeff, your host. And for this episode, we are going to talk about one of probably the more famous saints, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because, I mean, even me in a Protestant evangelical upbringing, I know who Francis of Assisi is and stuff like that. So, Jake, tell us about Francis of Assisi.
So, Francis was born pretty much a spoiled rich child in northern Italy in the late 12th century. And when he was a kid, he dreamed of glory, wanted to be a knight and everything. And that's what he pursued for about the first 20 years. That wasn't until he was kind of proven not to be a good soldier and got captured a couple times. And slowly, eventually, he found himself being drawn more and more towards Christ. And he realized what he had been pursuing in this playboy lifestyle was not leaving him satisfied, it was nothing what he expected it to be. And what he eventually decided to do was to just literally give it all up. The most famous incident of that is when he really renounced his father and the world by literally stripping naked in the street, giving his father his clothes back, and walking off. And he founded what is known as the Franciscan order. And as I mentioned before, the Carmelites, their specific charism is poverty. Just really seeing everything through the lens of poverty and rejoicing in that. And he really just had absolute abandonment and entrustment to God. And these Franciscans, and later quickly joined by the Dominicans, who are another form of these mendicant orders, which are priests and brothers who live in community but aren't cloistered from the world, as for example the Benedictines, the Cistercians had been. They went out and preached the gospel. The Franciscans actively live with the poor, serve with the poor. They beg for their food. They begged for everything. And I mean, Francis himself just wore this patchwork of tattered, ratted cloth for his habit. And he has just been so extremely influential of just there's the famous Brother, Sun, and Sister Moon song that he composed, and he saw the beauty of creation, of how God is so glorified by what he has created. And and what I think is important also is I think sometimes it can get construed as pantheism, of seeing God as nature, whereas Francis is saying no, nature is not God, nature is the creation, but it is a reflection of the creator.
Right.
And he was essentially saying, well, if creation is this beautiful, how much more beautiful is the creator itself?
Yeah.
So he and his very famous companion as well, St. Clare, really just embraced this poverty as Christ commands us to, if you would be rich, sell everything you have.
Right.
This very paradoxical thing, but he's the source for a lot of things, just and an extremely joyful character as well, and of really seeing the radical call to holiness for all people. That's really what he was saying, is it's not for just these people who have mystical experiences. It's not for just the kings. It's not just for the monks in the monastery. It's for everybody.
Yeah. So whenever I've seen images of Francis, he's often accompanied by animals.
Yeah.
Is that a reflection of his kind of fascination with nature and creation?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely. He is the patron saint of animals, and that is very often what he's portrayed with. There's the famous instance he preached the birds. He was preaching to the people of Assisi. No one was listening. He's like, all right, I'll go preach the birds instead. And all these birds came and attentively listened to him preach the gospel. Yeah. Kind of seeing how creation, which doesn't have a free will, naturally can't turn away from God. They fulfill what they need to, but still just the creation itself glorifying the Lord and rejoicing in their creator as well.
So who was Pope during Francis's time?
It was Pope Innocent III.
Okay.
And Francis was actually quite well traveled for his day. He went to Egypt in an attempt to convert the Sultan. And the Sultan was like, I'm not going to convert, but I like this guy a lot. There's actually, I think it was a sword or something that the Sultan gave to Francis that's still in Assisi to this day. But he went to Innocent III. I can't remember if it was I think it was actually to get approval for this new order. And Innocent was very hesitant at first. He was, who is this guy? And this is shortly before, actually at the same time as the Cathar heresy is rising.
Mm-hmm.
So the church is very hesitant of all these wandering preachers, and this new kind of hippie flower child walks into the Vatican barefoot, dirty, and he's like, who is this guy? But he had a dream of Francis literally holding the church up. And Innocent realized that how important Francis was to be in the church, of really to revive and kind of reform the church, where to just kind of like, all right, let's refocus here, because there's actually a famous encounter he had where he was praying in this little church of San Damiano, which had just completely decayed, fallen apart, and the famous San Damiano cross, which is this giant Byzantine cross, and through it Christ spoke to him and said, Francis, rebuild my church. Not only he did rebuild the physical church around him, but he also went out and re-evangelized Europe. So this new evangelization effort that we're seeing in Europe, around the world, it's not new. It's had to happen multiple times.
Yeah. And it sounds like Francis, too, by being more focused on poverty, also had the effect on the church of forcing it to see some of its habits of, opulence and spending and stuff like that. Because I know that, like, just reading some of Francis's work, he talks about how the church is not immune to, opulence and spending and stuff like that. And he talks about, like, it's just, if we're truly fulfilling our lifestyle that Christ is calling us to, it is to forsake all of this,
and it's like what you're saying, like it's important to remember the church is made up of sinners, and the sinners are always going to be tempted towards opulence.
Yes. Which is why we have such a huge issue in America with the prosperity gospel.
Absolutely. And I mean, something I'd just like to point out is that the Franciscans being called a radical poverty, just kind of very often what's just reminding me of, like, a very common criticism of the church of, why do you spend all this money on these churches and this artwork when you could be out feeding the poor? But Jesus himself answered this when Mary Magdalene anointed his feet, and Judas is saying, well, this could have been sold and used to feed the poor.
Right.
And he said, let her do it, she's done.
Right.
She has honored me greatly.
Yeah.
You will always have the poor, you will not always have me.
Yeah.
So that was, and again, also this very paradoxical thing of, well, this is okay, but radical poverty and really just complete abandonment to God is a lot of it. And also honoring him to the extent that he can be honored. Yeah.
And I mean, ultimately, I think what underlies it is the fact that whether we have very little or very much, we can still honor God with it.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the underlying thing. Because, like, I think this was about 3-4 years ago, I had a student ask me one time, like, is it a sin to be rich? And I thought about it for a second, and I told them, no, I don't think it's a sin to be rich, because I don't think it's about how much money you have. I think it's what you do with it, how you steward it.
Absolutely.
Because, like, if you're hoarding it for yourself, then, yeah, that's a misuse of funds.
Right.
But if you're really, truly living into the understanding that God has given you everything, therefore nothing you have is, like, ever going to be enough to lift God up.
Right.
You can start changing your attitude towards, like, okay, well, I have been blessed with much. How can I bless others?
Exactly.
So I think that's kind of an important thing to highlight and illustrate. So with Francis of Assisi, he founded the Franciscan order, which is still in existence.
Still alive and well, yeah.
Still alive and well. What is something that characterizes, you said the extreme poverty, but what's something else that characterizes the Franciscan order?
I would also say the extreme diversity of it. There's millions of Franciscans within the Franciscan family, and this is, a big joke here, but just constant split. There's kind of the main branches of the Capuchins, the Friars Minor, the Conventuals, but just within the spirit of Francis, trying to figure out, how do we live out the gospel? How do we evangelize? Because like the Dominicans, they are also evangelists. I mean, one of their primary charisms is being known the poor, that radical poverty. But you have certain Franciscans, such as the ones found by Mother Angelica, who are evangelists, and they do that through the mediums of the new evangelization, through technology, etc. You also have, I believe it's the Franciscan Friars of the Atonement, I believe is their name, but they are primarily focused on ecumenism. But it's all in the spirit of Francis. But seeing how that spirit is all encompassing of all these different aspects within the faith.
Right. It's like it's being exercised in different ways, but it still has the same root of Franciscan kind of theology and thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it. Nice. Well, again, when I've ever seen pictures of Francis, it's always been with animals, but it's also been with the bald patch on the head.
The tonsure, yeah.
Yeah, it's called the tonsure?
Tonsure.
Okay. So he wasn't going bald. That was like a purposeful...
That they used to, I believe some orders still do it, but what they would do is they would shave the top of your head, and it was just like kind of that stereotypical like medieval monk thing you see with just like the bald head and the hair. That was an actual practice that they would do. I think some modern, like, very traditionalist orders still do it, but it's really kind of gone out of practice.
Sure.
I don't quite know what the exact purpose and meaning of it was. I would imagine, so for instance, when women become nuns, they cut all their hair off. Like, one of the most famous stories of Clare, the founder of the Women Franciscans, is she ran away from home, and the night of Palm Sunday, she went to Francis and his brothers, and he cut off her hair and clothed her in the habit. And the cutting off the women's hair is saying, I have found a husband. I'm no longer looking for a partner of this earth, and I'm no longer seeking to impress people or attract anybody.
Right.
So I would imagine perhaps the tonsure could be the male equivalent of that. I don't know, though.
Yeah. I mean, because I know that in Jewish tradition of the yarmulke, it's like, the reminder that God is always above you. And, so I think there's a lot of imagery with that sort of stuff. All that to say, I'm glad I don't have to do a concert because I kind of like my hair. But cool. Anyway, well, we want to thank you again, Jake, so much for joining us these past few episodes. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Again, my knowledge of the saints has been very limited, but in our conversations with you, I just feel like it's been expanded so much. So I want to thank you again for joining us. And that'll do it for Summer with the Saints. Next week, we're going to introduce a new series called Should They? And Jake's laughing a little bit, but that's okay. So the series Should They is going to cover different things that are kind of taboo in the Christian church that we're going to talk about, like should Christians drink? Should Christians get tattoos? Should Christians swear? So we're going to cover that in our upcoming series, so make sure to look out for that next week. And as always, thanks for joining us. My name is Jeff. I'm your host. And remember, theology doesn't always have to be difficult. It is simply the study of who God is. Take care. We'll see you next week.